back in the 70s when you guys got to do that first experience with humpback whales. I was already been dreaming of whales a lot thanks to Jacques Cousteau and getting to experience them in the wild young when I was 6. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, about as far away from an ocean as you could get. But my parents took me to Laguna Beach, California when I was 6, and we went out to Catalina Island. And halfway there, the captain yelled dolphins on the bow, and I ran up there and looked over. And it was like love at first sight for me. And I kept that with me. And like a lot of us, I kind of got talked out of my childhood dream, but luckily for me, about 16 years ago, I got back into it. And I've been doing humpback whale research and research on orcas and other whale species since 1994. And as Sylvia was talking about the moratorium that went into effect because of the original Save the Whales movement, which was an amazing movement back in the 70s and into the early 80s, because of that movement, a lot of people, if you walked up to them today and asked them if the whales had been saved, a lot of people would say yes. But as a lot of us in this room know, unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth, because today dolphins and whales are facing more threats than they ever have before. And we've talked about a lot of them today, and I'm going to hit on a few of them once again. But we've got toxic pollution, noise pollution, global warming, loss of habitat, overfishing, entanglement in nets, and expanding whaling. And so for me, I started thinking about what we could do to try to really look at the oceans on balance. And for me, because whales are such a charismatic species, I decided to create a campaign called Save the Whales Again, primarily because we didn't do the job right the first time, unfortunately, but because we've got so many new threats that they're being faced by, and threats that are growing and growing in volume. And in talking about global warming, one of the things that have really impacted whales is the impact it's had on what they prey on. Recent studies by Pew and the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy and others, we've seen an 80% reduction in the amount of krill production in the Antarctic. We've seen similar reductions of orthopods up in the Arctic, these organisms that form the basis of the food chain. So that's one of the really big effects, besides ocean acidification and others, that global warming is having, specifically on a lot of the top predators, not only whales and dolphins, but other sharks and fish that feed a lot on krill. And if you look at just the overfishing problem, and you look at it just in particular to dolphins and whales, we're seeing that overfishing is also wiping out some of their prey species. One comes to mind in particular is the Chinook salmon. Overfishing that has caused the Chinook salmon to deplete, among other things, up in the San Juan Islands. And now we have the southern resident orcas, which are in dire straits up there because they don't have the Chinook salmon that they need to feed on. And that definitely caused by overfishing, as well as another one, loss of habitat. Because the salmon runs up there, all of the timber along the salmon runs were cut down, and we saw the silting of the rivers and that clean riverbed that the salmons need, and they were dammed up. They weren't able to get back up and spawn. So, you know, right there you've got kind of a double whammy happening up in that area. And, you know, as bad as that is, if you just look at the entanglement issue from overfishing, according to Pew and U.S. policy, the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy, over 300,000 dolphins and whales and porpoises are just dying because of being entangled in nets every year. 300,000. I mean, the collateral damage from that is unbelievable. And I still think there may even be a couple of more threats that could be possibly killing more whales, because it's really hard to measure the collateral damage from what's going on from pollution. And the first one I'm going to talk a little bit about is ocean pollution. Ocean noise pollution is a huge problem in our oceans. Three main sources we have are shipping, seismic surveys, and military sonars. And if you look at what's going on just in shipping alone, because of the increased shipping traffic that we've seen over the last 40 years, the ambient or background noise in the oceans has been doubling every decade over the past 40 years, just based on shipping traffic alone. And if you look at what's been going on with seismic surveys that are done for oil and gas exploration, the types and the intensity of sounds that are being put out by this type of what I think right now is needless exploration in a lot of ways, and with what President Bush did last year and with Congress not upholding the moratorium on drilling around the coast, or opening up all sorts of new seismic surveys to take place. And unfortunately right now, even with all of that, without all of that, in the North Sea, up in the North Atlantic, because of the seismic surveys that are going on all the time up there, I mean, the whales that are feeding in those areas are just proliferated by the din of seismic surveys, pulsing every 7 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, it's unbelievable. Add on to the top of that, we have these military active sonars that we've gotten so good at our technology that blue whales make the largest natural sound in the natural world. They can make sounds up to over 200 decibels. And Roger Payne, who I've had a great opportunity to work with as well, has theorized that before the advent of ocean pollution by man in the oceans, that blue whales at the North Pole could hear and communicate with blue whales at the South Pole. Because of the characteristics of the SOFAR channels and how noise travels through water. We know for a fact in some of the work that I've done with humpback whales that the song of the North Pacific humpback whale and the 3 breeding grounds pretty much changes dynamically as the season goes, but it pretty much changes dynamically almost exactly the same in the Hawaiian Islands as it does off Baja California and as it does off the Japanese islands near Okinawa. So those animals are separated by almost 3,000 nautical miles, and yet they're singing the same song with dynamic changes that are pretty much changing at the same time. So you can see how dolphins and whales and other marine life need to have good communication to find mates, for prey, for navigation. They use sound like we use sight. And so with this proliferation of ocean noise that we have, it's a serious problem with the strandings that we've seen. We've only seen the animals that have washed up. A good example of what happened in the Bahamas, Dr. Ken Balcom, who I've had the opportunity to work with, had been studying beaked whales in the area of the Bahamas up to the year 2000, and had identified over 35 different beaked whales, individuals that he had photo IDs of. And in 2000, there was some naval training exercises that took place in the Bahamas, a mass stranding that ended up with a stranding of over 17, there were 17 whales that stranded of 3 different species. There were 2 baleen whales, 1 dolphin, and 14 beaked whales that ended up stranding. And looking at the heads of those animals, there was lots of hemorrhaging in around the eyes and the brains and the ears of these animals. And the mass trauma from these exercises caused these animals to have this hemorrhaging and to strand and to die. And since, they've been doing studies down there. And Ken Balcom, it's now been 9 years since that happened. He has not seen one of those 35 beaked whales that he had identified in that area. So not only did those 14 animals die that are on the beaches, but we know of at least 35 others that haven't been seen. And who knows what else the collateral damage was around there, not only for the beaked whales, but other fish that were exposed to that. So as I was preparing for this conference, I was sitting in my room and I was writing some things out in my office, and one of those leaf blowers went off outside, and it was like driving me crazy. So I went and I shut the window down, and it was still driving me crazy. And then some helicopters flew over and everything else, and I was thinking, my God, this is driving me this crazy. What do you think these sounds like from shipping, from seismic surveys, from sonar sound? And I made a film a few years back, 2 different films on sonar called Deadly Sounds in the Silent World 1 and 2. And I just want to play you a 10-second clip from that film to give you an idea of what they're listening to.
Silent world.
Thank you. That was a combination of shipping. The explosions were seismic surveys. The higher pitched whiny sound was mid-frequency active sonar, and then that lower pulsing sound was low-frequency active sonar. And so this is what these animals are exposed to around the world all of the time. I mean, it's unbelievable, and you're thinking about stress and those impacts on them. It's something that we really need to take account, and something that I think needs great attention, and I applaud the NRDC and IFAW and all of us that are part of the International Ocean Noise Coalition for really taking this issue to heart and moving it up. So there's lots of work to be done, but you know, this issue is really an important issue. I've been working a lot on toxic pollution with Dr. Payne, who just finished a 5-year study of sperm whales around the world. And the things that he found and others have found on the toxic loads that dolphins, whales, and porpoises are carrying is unbelievable. Like we've heard earlier, we've been poisoning the ocean's food chain from the bottom up. We've got mercury, PCBs, DDTs, fire retardants, chromium, other toxic chemicals that we're just dumping into the oceans, and these are being absorbed into phytoplankton and into plankton, and then that's being eaten by krill, and then of course krill and these things are getting eaten by smaller fish and by medium fish and by larger fish, and it's making its way up to the top predators, to where the top predators in the oceans are basically swimming toxic dump sites right now. Marine mammals, particularly many species of dolphins and whales, have the dubious distinction of being the most contaminated animals on the planet. It used to be the belugas kind of had that dubious distinction, but fortunately for them, they've been displaced by now the orcas, and it's the transient orcas of the Pacific Northwest which are now the most contaminated animals on the planet. The southern residents, which I'll show a clip on, are also very contaminated. And what we've been doing by poisoning the food chain from the bottom up is ultimately we're poisoning ourselves. And that's really, I think, the message that we have to get out, especially if we need to reduce and stop some of these fisheries that shouldn't be going on. And unfortunately, they still talk about killing dolphins and killing whales as fisheries, as part of the whole fisheries package. So one of the things we've been working on a lot is correlating what's happening to the humans that are having to subsist off of a marine diet. And so Hardy Jones of Blue Voice has been doing some studies. The things that he found in Japan from the people that have been subsisting off of dolphin and whale meat primarily is that a lot of them are highly contaminated. He had some of the folks that were running at 89 milligrams of mercury in their samples. And the Japanese and the US standards is 1 milligram, 1 part per million, excuse me, is what is normal. And they were at 89 parts per million. Other problems that we've seen in Greenland right now, the Inuit mothers that have to subsist up there are warned by their doctors not to breastfeed their children because their breast milk is so toxic, it's considered toxic waste. And so they cannot breastfeed their own children. We're seeing in Greenland, in Faroe Islands, the people that are subsisting off of pilot whale meat there, the government just told them last year that the pilot whale meat is way too contaminated and that they've really requested their citizens not to consume it anymore. So we can see how this is coming full circle.